Hi everyone, my name is Ryan Osborne and I'm the Rhodes University SRC Projects Manager for 2020. Welcome to day 2 of the SRC Student Media Colloquium. Today we will be discussing improving the relationship between student media, the SRC Media Office, university stakeholders, and the Makana media community. Yesterday, we facilitated a panel discussion with representatives from each of the student media organizations, and that conversation was based on the rise and fall of student media at the Purple University. I would also just like to take this time to encourage everyone that is joining us to please take a look at the beautiful presentation put together by Mr. Rod Amna from the Journalism Department. This is on mapping the media ecology of Makanda. And without further ado, I'm going to bring up our keynote speaker for today, Mr. Julian Jacobs. Mr. Julian Jacobs is a PhD candidate, within the School of Journalism and Media Studies at Rhodes University. He was a journalist working for UWC Student Voice, student newspaper, Saturday and the Sunday Argus, the Cape Docta, my own community newspaper in Manenberg, Cape Town, and the Hampstead and Highgate Express in London, United Kingdom. So without any further ado, Mr. Jacobs, if you can open for us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Ryan, and the SRC and my fellow panelists. I thought, Rod, I must commend you for your presentation. A lot of the things that I wanted to touch on, you kind of broadly spoke about, so I'm not really going to delve into that, but I want to perhaps take a different view or look at it differently. I want to talk about my journey coming to Makanda and how I view the communication space. And I thought perhaps, and hopefully I will be a little bit provocative or a little bit critical, but also outline some of the things I think is working within this the media ecology that we find in Makanda. So let me tell you about my journey. I came to Makanda in January 2018. And before that, I was based in Belgium, and knowing that I was coming back home, I wrote a letter, an email to Sue, the Grocott's mail, saying, listen, I'm apparently coming to your town. I'm going to study there, and I wanted to see if I could, do some freelance work on the Grocott's mail. And how did I get to know about the Grocott's mail? I obviously Googled it, looked at what's happening in this particular town, how old it is, who's the editors, and how is it situated within the particular town. Based on our email correspondence, when I did arrive in Makanda, I met Sue and we spoke about this particular newspaper and possible involvement. Couple of months later, much later, I finally got involved, and particularly in this particular year, where I started writing. What I then saw as a student coming into the journalism department and looking at how the student plays, the university plays a role within Makanda was quite interesting for me. Firstly, I saw a very vibrant institution that deeply cares about the community. And how do I know that? I obviously went to the community engagement office of Rhodes University, where I spent some time trying to find out how they go into the community and how do students get access to spend time with whatever organization or whatever community. And I found that very interesting. And the more I read Grocott's, the more I wanted to get involved, and that's what I eventually did. When I finally registered as a student, as a PhD student, I got to understand how the journalism department fits within the university setup as well as within the community. And again, there I found through Rod's work and some of the others, Cindy and the newspapers that they have started over the years, how they use this particular or the school as a platform to engage communities and the youth. And I thought that was fantastic. And I wanted to know a little bit more and more about that. Then I got to know alumni office, the communication advancement office, and I spent some time with them, and then I got involved in terms of freelancing for them as well as a student, and understand how they communicate, who are their audiences, and that was significant. And then I heard about this Makana Circle of Unity, which is a body, which is a multi-stakeholder body that consists of Rhodes, the municipality, a lot of the community-based organizations in this town, and businesses. And I wanted to know a little bit of what's going on there. And then I got involved as well. And then I got chosen or elected as a co-chair for the communications cluster. Now this Makana Circle of Unity does not replace the municipality, does not replace Rhodes University, does not replace all kinds of organizations. It's just a body that tries to make sure that we work together as a town. Now, I came into this town when I saw that the municipality was taken to court. I experienced the potholes like everybody else. I've experienced the lack of service like everybody else. And there's been this hotly contested terrain within this particular town. And I wanted to understand how best can we get out of this? How best do we portray to the world that this town is working, that 26 years or 28 years later, after the end of, or the born of the democracy, a town that was pivotal in the anti-apartheid movement is making, or was claiming again its stance. So the university, for me, is an important vehicle in terms of bringing about change and making use of our students within the communities. How I obviously see the SRC play a part in this whole media ecology, as Rod very nicely pointed out in his presentation. Obviously, the SRC came on a ticket, and they indicated to the student body that this is what we're going to do as an SRC this particular year. And then what happened? COVID came, and COVID disrupted the way we have seen and the way we've operated throughout this year. And it was very interesting to see how one particular campaign called, which the university, specifically the VC, used these communications, these letters sent out to students and staff, that we will not leave any student behind. And I thought that was a very clever concept and a very clever campaign. And I saw that the SRC piggybacked on that, and through their communication channels that they've been using, they've been talking to students who has been affected by the fact that they don't have access to data, that they don't have access to laptops when they had to return home because of COVID. And that was a very interesting way where the university as an institution and the SRC as a student body were working together in terms of reaching students that were left behind, or that seemingly were going to be left behind. And that was a very interesting scenario for me in terms of how they were communicating. What I saw the SRC is doing very well this year has been talking to their, to the student body on WhatsApp, on Zooms, on Facebook and Twitter, etc. And that was very interesting in terms of having regular check-ins with students. And I found that was very encouraging. In terms of how I see the SRC working with the media, the local media, I really think that, and the other student media on campus, I really think that we obviously need to know what the Grocott stands for, what the Radio Grahamstown stand for, and what RMR stand for in terms of who they speak to, who they address, in terms of how you can then use your messages within these particular platforms or media outlets. And I really think that the SRC has done a very good job in terms of that. I want to commend obviously the communications of Rhodes in terms of how they have been communicating on a regular basis to the entire student body and also make the town aware of what was going on. I do think, however, that within the town itself, there's a greater need for competencies within, say, for instance, the municipality. There's a lot of poor kind of service delivery going on, leadership going on, that needs to be boosted. And I think somehow the students can play a role in this regard. And I think that's important, because I've been working with the municipality through the Makana Joint Operating Center based on the COVID response of Makanda. And there I've been exposed to what's really going on a municipal level, on a district level, in terms of what is lacking and how we need change and how we need to help one another. And I really feel that students can play a role in this regard. I just want to leave it there. I'm happy to, obviously engage with everybody in terms of their contributions as well as my contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Thank you. I just wanted to reiterate something that you said, especially from the SRC's perspective, is the communication from the university during the COVID pandemic has been incredible. We have been constantly fed with new information, constantly updated. So to the Communications and Advancement Division, I must really reiterate what Mr. Jacobs has said. Well, now that we've introduced the Communications and Advancement Division, I want to introduce Ilva Peters, who will be on the panel for the discussion today. She is representing the Communications and Advancement Division. She is the senior social media officer at Rhodes University. So welcome, Ilva. And also joining Ilva will be Sue McLennan, who is an editor from Grocott's Mail. Welcome, Sue. Mr. Rod Abner, who is a senior lecturer at the Rhodes School of Journalism and Media Studies, and also one of my favorite lecturers at Rhodes. I want to welcome you all to the panel discussion and invite you now to just add any contributions that you have to what Mr. Jacobs has shared with us.
Maybe I can go first. Yeah, so the message I want to get across about our division, I really appreciate the compliments. We are a very small team. There's actually 3 of us, and we handle the communications, marketing, and branding of the university, which is why we actually take on more of a supportive role rather than an active role. And I think we have good relationships with the other stakeholders. I mean, with, for example, with RMR, we're actually on their board. So, we give them advice and strategic input and stuff like that. With the Journ School, we've always had a good relationship, and we are currently discussing things with them like a skills transfer program, and Grocott. We often collaborate with them. And the SRC, we also historically have a good relationship with the SRC. From our side, what we would like to see much more of is contributions from the students, to publish on our platforms. So as you guys know, we've got the website, there's Student Life, we've got the campus screens, which a big motivation behind the campus screens was actually to service the students. And we've got mailing lists, we've got the student news and all of that. But with us being such a small team, the actual content creation is a little bit difficult for us to always come out with fresh ideas on how to represent our students. I mean, we do a lot of prize winning and things like that. But what I think would make an incredible contribution from, is more input from the students, almost like a by the students for the students, where we can, we can guide, we can edit and then share on our platforms, so that the voice of a student is, comes across stronger on our various platforms. That's basically the sort of input I have from that perspective. I also just maybe wanted to bring up with regards to having regular meetings. I think it would serve everyone very well, especially when we're in a time of crisis like we were when the lockdown got announced. And I mean, a few times after that, things did get a bit difficult and challenging for everyone. And I think it might be a good idea for all of us just to have a WhatsApp group where, just in terms of getting in contact with each other and staying in contact with each other easier. So that's my contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ilva, for that. I just wanted to reiterate something that I find very interesting. Having facilitated yesterday's conversation with the student media organizations, we posed a question to them of how can divisions such as the Communications and Advancement Division, Grocott's Mail, the Journalism School itself, further the development of the student media organizations and the development of a strong sort of student media like visibility on campus. And one of the things they also brought up was content creation and how there's three distinctive RMR with the radio, Opidan Press that does print, and Activate that does the social media stuff. There was also a thing of bringing up the need for content and how some of the content that they share would be appreciated to have been shared by the university, or if there could be links like that. I think the word link was used by one of the editors. So I really do like your idea about the WhatsApp group and the building the good relationships and the historically good relationship that you have with the SRC. I know it's appreciated from our point of view as well. So then I would like to pose the question to the panel. How do you think we can then boost student involvement? What do you want from student media in terms of student media, student contributions? I heard Ilva say, what would you recommend or suggest in terms of recreating or redefining student media and at Rhodes with involvement from both student media organizations and the divisions that Rhodes has?
Julian, I think Rod might know a little bit more in terms of the student media at Rhodes. I also have a student media background, so I know the kind of roles that we played back in the 80s. So it's slightly different in terms of but we want to grow, obviously, student press. We want to make sure that it's vibrant, that it speaks, that it publishes, that it's broadcast, whatever the case may be. That is something that we want to do, and I do know some of us are sitting on the advisory boards, etc. So it's an important area of student life, and we want to encourage people to join these student bodies, or student media at least.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jacobs. I see we have a hand from Ms. McLennan. I don't know if you would like to contribute now.
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure how much space I have to speak, or I gave a lot of thought in preparation for this to the relationship between student media and Grocott's. And perhaps if you can just give me 5 minutes to explain before I talk about that, just where I think, do you need video or are you okay without?
No, the floor is yours.
I'm sure we're fine without. So I think, in thinking about the relationship between student media and Grocott's, I had to think first of the role of Grocott's in Makanda, and of course Rod spoke very extensively and expertly about the communicative ecology, as we know. But the role of Grocott's in particular has always been in flux. If you read the little blurb that I sent ahead of this, So it was established as a newspaper of record originally 150 years ago, with its main purpose as a purveyor, as a conveyor of news, and obviously ideology. And very much simultaneously was, with the carrying the ideology was the notion of Grocott's as an identity, or as a particular voice. And again, Rod touched on it in his presentation. A lot of the resistance to where we've gone and where we've been in the past 5 and longer years has been from people who have quite a static view of what Grocott should and could represent. So from its origins as a newspaper of record, we played, I think, quite an important role in just providing straight information for a couple of years. I'm talking probably in the past 5 years or so. And throughout, of course, Grocott's is established within the university as a training place for students primarily, but it also has been a training place for citizen journalists. So just to establish where Grocott's comes from. I think in more recent times, as the media landscape has changed, as we, along with every other media organization in the world, has entered a state of crisis, made more extreme by the COVID pandemic, obviously. I think we evolved to something where we became a place where people saw each other or heard each other, or at least we aspired to be that. And again, this, things are changing so quickly with the development of the digital storytelling lab at Rhodes. Again, the landscape changes, and from an organization that tells people stories, that allows people to see each other through telling each other stories, I think we aspire to be a place more like, you can say, I suppose, a sort of magazine for the town in a way, in that I think we hope that people see it as a place where they can tell each other what they're doing, tell each other what they're about. So a kind of a collecting point. But even that, especially in recent months, has been that aspiration, that idea of what we could be has been shattered. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I think it's very positive that people are finding their own ways of communicating. People who have the means, as again, this is something that came up very strongly in Rhodes' presentation, are telling their own stories anyway, or they're paying someone to do it for them. People who don't have the means need access to the means to tell their own stories, and the Digital Storytelling Lab is a fantastic initiative in that regard. So just to get back to the point, which is I'm trying to establish possibly what Grocott's current role is in this community. Along with training students, it also could serve as a meeting place of people's experiences, ideas, and their own contributions, their own voices. It could be that. So in that context, I suppose I would say perhaps a respectful, mutually respectful role for student media and Grocott's could be that student voices are heard via student media through collaboration, through sharing in Grocott's. Now, very much what Ilva was talking about as well, student voices in official university communication, I think it's really important to hear those voices more. In what currently, it may not last as such or in that form, but currently people still do tend to see Grocotts as a kind of collecting point for the voices of the town. And perhaps at the moment, it could serve as a good place for more people in the town, more people in the community to hear what students' concerns are. Then perhaps I'll keep quiet now, because then I think Uwe did touch on it, but then talking about structural relationships, how would those relationships work? Would they work through shared diaries? Would they work through shared training? And perhaps on collaboration on certain stories or issues. So I think I've probably said enough.
Okay, thank you, Sue, for that contribution. I believe we have a hand from Mr. Amna, so I think we're just going to continue with you, Rod, if that's okay.
Great, hi. Look, I already got my chance to say quite a lot, so I'll keep it very brief, I think. But I thought just a couple of things. Maybe it would be helpful to differentiate between the kind of communicative ecology at UCA, inside Rhodes, if you like, but to imagine that quite widely. And of course, what's interesting about the university is that, you know, the people who work in it, the academic staff and the service staff, the administrative staff, all pretty much live here. So that bridge, you know, to the community is quite a profound one. Students are more transitory, but, you know, 3 or 4 years living here, I think that whole question of their relationship to the wider community is a very interesting and important one. And as I think I mentioned in the presentation, a higher proportion of students at Rhodes are involved in community engagement work than at any other university in the country. And I think that's very significant. So there is an increasing investment by students in the, you know, in the city. And, you know, it would be interesting to look at, well, what is the communicative dimension of that at the moment? I think Ruth is very active on Facebook and elsewhere online, but perhaps we could be looking towards, you know, boosting that. So the question of inside the university community, but inevitably, you know, what is the connection between the university and the wider town, and obviously the broader communicative ecology of Makanda. I think, you know, there are sort of, broadly speaking, 3 ways of conceptualizing democracy, and concomitant sort of ways of theorizing or imagining media ecologies, if you like. The first would be a kind of representative, liberal, pluralist democracy, the idea of a sort of trustee journalism. Sue was talking about information, you know, needing to be a watchdog, needing to hold power to account, needing to distribute important information that citizens need to be self-governing, if you like. That's the sort of 20th century conception of journalism, and it has its problems. So there have been a lot of critiques of the weaknesses of that model, and, you know, it moves to go towards a more deliberative kind of democracy, a more deliberative model. So public journalism, solutions journalism, constructive journalism, these kind of journalism reform movements, if you like, to try and ensure that there's a more facilitative role, and that journalists are building more of a catalyzing, facilitating kind of role in the community, and cross-fertilizing and getting citizens to talk to each other across their bonded groups into bridges, into linkages with the state and the market and so on. But even that conception of democracy, in a sense, is being overtaken by a massive global participatory approach to democracy, you could say, whether that's the populist right or you know, the hard left, but also just through mass participation in social media, there is the potential, at least, for participatory democracy to be enhanced by these kind of participatory communication forms. And I think that's where it gets interesting for me in the current moment, and Sue alluded to this, you know, what is our relationship to citizen journalism, to what citizens are doing out there, talking to each other, but also telling their own stories to some extent through things, you know, initiatives like the Social Innovation Hub. interestingly, all the first years this year in the journalism class made their own personal digital stories. So they know how to make, certainly to self-represent, and some of those stories are fantastic. I mean, really, really powerful and really interesting. But they now know how to make those things. So they could be making those digital stories again and again about a whole range of different topics and issues. So it's about upskilling people, I guess you could say. Second year class have been doing COVID diaries podcasts. I'm interested to know if Ilva knows about the Corona diaries and whether that would be something worth sharing with the wider university community. Some beautiful stories in those podcasts. So there is stuff being generated, and students are being upskilled to be able to contribute in a participatory way in a communicative ecology. I think that those forms of communication are really important, and more important than ever, and the potential is massive. So, one of the things if you just allow me just to share that, I can't share my screen, which is fine. But I looked at those those different roles that are played within a communicative ecology. So you've got your institutional producers, and then alternative sites. So the question being, is student media alternative or is it institutional? And then you get these community bridges, individuals or sites that connect otherwise disparate communities. Those are important actors within a communicative ecology. And Grocott plays that role to some extent. You get niche networkers who are not associated with institutions, but they produce a lot of content about maybe single issues that they're particularly interested in. And then most people these days are issue amplifiers of one kind or another. People share stuff, discuss stuff, maybe not single issue stuff, but so they're all of those roles. And I think what I'm arguing for is a situation where all those roles are enhanced, and that we see the importance of all those different layers. So more communicative capacity, if you like, from workers at the university, from citizens in the community, from students, etc., and platforms to support that, and cross-fertilization between those different platforms. So I think, what Ilva was saying, what Julian was saying about those collaborations, I think it's really important. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, Rob, for that. I don't know if anyone else has any contributions before we move on.
Yeah, I just wanted to check in Pacific, maybe the SRC could maybe answer me in terms of your Opidan students. What kind of voice do they have within, in terms of their issues that they're dealing with? Because now they're living outside campus, outside the residence, and they're basically situated within the town. Is there a difference in terms of their issues that they need to raise, or do they have an avenue to raise their issues? I know there's the Opidan Press, but other than that.
I think in terms of Opidan students, the Opidan students have an Opidan office, and the Opidan office, I think, is also, there's a portfolio in the Opidan office for media or networking, like they are under all the leadership structures. So I'm not sure if Shilatelo can contribute more to this conversation or this point, but I know in terms of the Opidan office or Opidan information, that is controlled by the OP office. So Shilatelo, I don't know if you can comment on that.
There is, as Ryan says, an Opidan union, and within that Opidan union, they form sort of like a res committee, and there is a media and marketing representative, and that person is responsible for publicity for the Opidan union and for communicating with the students within the Opidan constituency. So there is also a mailing list that the Opidan Union has to communicate with the students. They do have some issues with that, and there are points to be improved. A lot of the students have actually formed WhatsApp groups for themselves to communicate with each other and possibly even with some of their leaders. And the Opidan counselor of the SRC is also available as someone that the Opidan students can communicate with. Yes.
Okay, so moving on, I want to put a question towards the panel about how do you think, from your perspective, division's perspective, how do you think student press at Rhodes could possibly create an ecosystem of communication that allows for debate on campus, as well as raise awareness on relevant issues in Makanda? Rod, I see you've raised your hand. The floor is yours.
Well, Sian, the editor of Activate, gave a seminar to the third-year writing class just recently, and I think made the point very clearly that it would be helpful to require journalism students, especially in their first year, to work for the student press. We do encourage students to do that. We talk about a 40-hour kind of participation in a newsroom, and students can do that back home when they go home for vax, or they can do it strung out through the year. But it turns into quite a mechanistic thing, where students do their 40 hours and then they just withdraw. And student press are stuck, towards the middle or the end of the year with very small staff capacity and so on. And there are all sorts of other issues around sort of, inverted commas, forcing students, to participate in the student press. But I think it's worth pursuing and thinking about in a deep way about, what the appropriate way forward around that might be. And that's one thing, is just capacity and getting students directly involved in the student press. But the other, I think, is really thinking more imaginatively about that role I was talking about earlier, that how do you facilitate deliberation? How do you get participation? And maybe thinking about a different kind of press model, actually. Something that really sort of reaches out to students and looks at what students are already saying and communicating with each other and building on that and adding value in the network and taking your cue from students and their values and their concerns. And really working from that model, so a more participatory, engaged model of journalism rather than the old trustee model of, let's do accountability journalism and maybe a bit of lifestyle stuff and entertainment stuff. Doing something much more engaged, which might include all sorts of strategies around, well, the kinds of things that we've, come up with this year around networking online, but also face-to-face stuff when that becomes possible again, hopefully. Yeah.
I have a question maybe for everybody. Is there still a need for student press? I mean, everybody's have access to all kinds of electronics and media and consumption of whatever media, news sites. Is there really an appetite for student media on Rhodes, at Rhodes? And isn't this a time where we look at this and say, if there is still a need, what is it that we need to do? What steps must be taken to encourage students to sign up, etc., etc. Otherwise, I mean, it's there, but no one really wants it. There's no uptake in terms of student numbers. And it becomes like and it becomes a burden for the SRC or whoever else, or for us as a journalism department. I really think we need to ask this particular question. Is there still a need? And if there is, what should we do?
Yes, and it actually ties into what Julian was just saying. The campus screens are a very, very good awareness raising platform. But that said, it's a relatively new project. And in terms of feedback and interest, we've never actually been able to, because we were supposed to do it this year, but to actually get feedback from the usefulness of it as a platform for students. So we're hoping to, this will probably only happen next year, but feedback from students is something that's incredibly useful for the communications department, because we don't know whether our forms of communications are working as they should and as they are intended to without feedback. But certainly, if we do find that the campus screens are holding the interest of the students and students are getting information from it and they are paying attention to them, then it really is one of the best platforms that we have for students in terms of raising awareness on all kinds of issues. And I mean, it's videos, it can do posters, stills. It's quite versatile in that sense. So yes, feedback is key, I think.
Ilva, I want to ask maybe if you could maybe explain how the process of getting stuff submitted to the screens or student news, or the process of communications that you have, how students have access to those platforms.
Yeah, the thing is, they are quite specific. You know, each different platform has its own rules. You know, one could say that. So when someone mentioned training earlier, I mean, I almost feel like that's critical, where, you know, at least once a year with the communications division, there needs to be training where we can explain, you know, this is how the mailing lists work. This is how, you know, this is what we do publish on social media, what we don't publish on social media. For example, the screens, they are without sound. So if a video, and I mean, Julian has gone through this with us, you can't just put any video on there. It needs to be according to the TV's specifications. We have content documents that we can send in PDF format, which explains, you know, all of that information, how to submit, what the process is, what kind of information we're looking for, what the categories are. And with regards to mailing lists, I mean, there is student news and anyone can actually send an email to that list, but it doesn't mean that it will be released. Each mailing list has a purpose. And if the moderator, which falls within our division, finds that the email doesn't adhere to the purpose of the mailing list, then it will be rejected. But even there are, you know, like we can't have more than 1 megabyte attachment, you know, things like that. But all of that information is available. And there's nothing stopping anyone from requesting to have their own mailing list created. So, you know, for example, there could be a mailing list which is similar to student news, but it's not moderated by our division. You know, where you can create your own purpose, whether it's, you know, a debate forum or, you know, emergency communications, or, you know, things that are specific to things happening around campus, you know, student events, things like that. So that's also a possibility.
Yes, I can agree with it.
Oh yes, Julian.
No, I agree with that. It's a very nice medium to use, and it's text-based, so it's audio, visual, but you need to have text running across the screen because obviously there's no audio sound.
I see we have a hand from Sue. Sue, you have the floor.
Yeah, so I think, you know, you're wondering how to get students involved is one of the things you're asking. And self-interest is a fantastic way to do it. Irrespective of if you're studying journalism or not, everybody in every career needs to learn how to communicate in a cool way, in a way that people will listen to you. I mean, I think of this guy, what's his name, the snake student, Chad, the way he developed an audience for himself through, okay, it wasn't local or hyper-local, but in the same way that student journalists working for Grocott have a unique opportunity to not only develop a local, hyper-local audience, but also to actually simultaneously engage with that audience. Even more so, I think students whether journalism students or not, have an amazing opportunity in particularly the student press at Rhodes to, again, develop an audience and engage with them actually, well, after COVID, maybe face-to-face as well, and in other ways, and actively do things with them. So if Grocott provides a really, the possibility of a top-to-bottom approach of engaging with and developing an audience, Rhodes Student Media really has a fantastic opportunity to hyper local develop that kind of a relationship, and professionals in any fields, whether you're studying business or snakes or whatever you're studying. And I think it's an amazing opportunity, and I think that needs to be sold more by the student press and perhaps in partnership with the journal school.
Thank you for that, Sue. I see we have a hand from Rod. Rod, I don't know if you would like to contribute.
Oh, thank you. Just looking at the student press content, one of the things I spoke about in that presentation was the idea of geographic communities versus communities of interest. A lot of the stuff that is produced by students at Rhodes could be produced in any other center, in the country or even globally for that matter. And there's certainly a community of interest. Young people are interested in ... fashion, health, a whole range of different things. And unless you're producing content that is world-class in a sense and competes with all of that other community of interest work out there, it's very difficult to capture an audience. So I'd like to echo what Sue's saying. When a local person is a herpetologist and knows about snakes locally and is able to say stuff about where the latest capture has been, and et cetera, et cetera, that's adding value to the communicative ecology. All sorts of students have all sorts of amazing interests. My third-year writers with my colleague Jill this year were doing blogs, and they were picking something that they really cared about and then writing about that. What we're struggling with is building an audience for that, and we're not being clever about how to, in an ecology, cross-fertilize, put that information in places where people might see it and engage with it, and so on. I think the other point I'd like to make is that the student press, and Julian's question is a really important one. I think we should just assume that there's a role for the student press. We need to be specific about what that is, and I'd be interested to hear what was said yesterday. But for me, there has to be some kind of grand narrative. Rhodes is facing multiple problems. I mean, we've got these globally induced problems around COVID and so on, but even before that, we've got problems. We're a small university, we struggle economically, we don't have the infrastructures that other universities have. We're in a town that is under massive pressure. There are a lot of parents who don't want to send their kids here anymore, so there is, you could say, middle-class flight from Rhodes. The university is shifting and changing because of the pressures that we're facing. And yet we're a very good little university, actually. Our ratings might be slipping in a formal sense, but your undergraduate education here at Rhodes is a powerful thing. What is the grand narrative amongst students around why it's valuable to come here in the first place? What are the points of value about being here? And I would argue, small student staff ratios, the immersive experience of being on campus, but even in digs in a small town like this, it's a completely different kind of experience. And I think we need to be accenting some of those positives. I mean, there are lots of negatives as well, and we should accent those too. And it's about working out what kind of, what is a university? What kind of life do we want? Not just the formal university stuff, but what is the quality of life that we want as students here? These students have created the skate park in the community. That's an amazing thing. But what about on campus as well? What are we creating for ourselves to enhance our lives and make the student experience better? So what kind of deliberation are we having about what kind of university we want to be, what kind of students we want to be, what kind of human beings we want to be? All of those things are, should be of interest, to young people. And I think the student press's role is really in looking at the hyperlocal, finding the value and the problems and teasing that out and looking at student experiences through the lens of living here. And that's what worries me about the student press, is it's very general and it could be written anywhere. And I think it's about really not turning your back on, you know, look at the ground beneath our feet at UCA, but also in this wider community. There's a lot of assets here. There's a lot of value here. As I said before, many students are engaged with this community. Let's hear about those stories of engagement. Why are so many students doing this? What is their experience of doing that? What is that telling them? How does that factor into their education? What is that telling them about the kind of world that we live in and want to live in the future? All of those things are incredibly interesting and, you know, could be the subject of really great journalism. But I think we need that grand narrative, if you like, and for students to be excited by that in some way. I mean, Shilita was talking about how we could afford, you know, a premium Zoom account, you know, for student government. You know, what are the essential infrastructure things that we need to facilitate this communicative ecology and this sense of, you know, let's work out who we are and who we want to be.
Right.
Thank you for that, Rod. I just wanted to add a contribution from yesterday's conversation with the student media organizations. There seems to be a general concept that Rhodes had its student media heyday, was the word we used a lot. We made a lot of reference to during the protests that happened on campus, the Are You Referenceless protest, the Fees Must Fall protest. So what was said by one of the representatives was that there was a lot of active need for information regarding the protests on campus at the time. So I put it out there that the same situation has happened with coronavirus. We've had to all readjust our entire lifestyle and move on to a mainly remote online form of life and a lifestyle. So does anyone have any contributions on how student media or how your divisions have been impacted by coronavirus and how the content creation has changed from the protests that Rhodes was so famous for to sort of dying out in the activism sense and now having been hit by coronavirus?
Yeah, I just want to maybe contribute to that. I can say now, today, we are at 106 active cases again. So there's 11 on campus, and I think there could be more from I'm not sure what the latest test results are, although you might want to add comment to that. But look, the point is this: 106 active cases are rearing its head again. COVID is coming back. We see what's going out within the community, within the town. Businesses are not adhering or not implementing regulations, COVID regulations. What are we supposed to be doing? Are we, as a student body, as local media, issuing statements or reminding people that they should still continue social distancing, washing your hands and wearing a mask? Or are we just, as what everybody's throwing this word out, we are pandemic fatigue? And I think we either need to come up with innovative ideas in terms of communicating this as a collective and not as just one particular organization issuing statements, whatever the case may be. Students are going into town, they're not wearing their masks. They are going into pubs, etc., where it's free for all. There should be particular messages that needs to be developed consistently all the time. I know the police and some of the organizations will be raiding or having meaningful communications with shop owners and pubs and taverns over the next 2 weeks, just to help stem the tide. And I think students, the student body, the SRC, and we should communicate to students in terms of, while they're here, adhere to the regulations.
I see we have a hand from Ilva. Ilva, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to add, I mean, the COVID pandemic changed everything. You know, how we communicate, and I mean, for example, we still do, we've got bi-weekly reports that we have to submit to the Department of Higher Education. you know, laying out what kind of communication, raising awareness, you know, related to COVID, we are actually putting into place. So instead of working on what, you know, serving Rhodes University, our communications division suddenly had to work to serve a much broader, you know, landscape. So, and it's very recently that we've actually had a breather where, you know, sort of around level 1 time, where we could almost catch up with our deliverables for the year. And as Julian was saying, it is worrying now that, you know, that there seems to be a resurgence. Because as soon as that happens, you know, communication has a responsibility to basically put things on hold and prioritize communications about, you know, levels of lockdown, coronavirus, washing hands, you know, all of that stuff. And yeah, I mean, just from our division perspective, it's had a really, really huge effect on our work, you know, just our deliverables and how we normally function. So, I mean, if we can try and, you know, and sort of jump in ahead of time and try and keep the numbers down so that we don't end up where Rhodes University Communications is working on COVID 85% of the time, it would be really great.
Thank you for that, Ilva. I think just before we wrap up, I would like to just ask or put it to the panel if you could maybe just briefly summarize what you as a person involved in a conversation like this would want the goal of this conversation to be. What do you, when you were invited to the Student Media Colloquium, what did you hope would be achieved by a platform like this? And do you think a platform like this is beneficial? So that's just open to the floor.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I really think it's a good idea. It's something that must continue, as Ilva also asked. And I think it's critical that there's an understanding of the roles that we play as within the media ecology or the communicative spaces that we operate in terms of if we are influencers or not. I think that's critical for us. There's a need obviously for student press, there's a need for local media, a strong press. There's obviously a need for a strong communications from an institutional point of view. And I think as a journalism department, we need to understand the space that we operate within and produce students that can function within these spaces. And I'm happy I'm here at this point in time. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Julian. I see we have a hand from Rod.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think this colloquium of yours is a good example of what's been going on under COVID, and you know, some of the things we've learned, some things that are quite positive, which is to bring together different constituencies. You know, Makana Circle of Unity has been having meetings on Zoom as well, and it is fascinating, you know, to see 20, 30 people from disparate parts of the community come together to talk about a common set of goals and purposes and so on. That's very positive. The other thing I would say is that, you know, when I was saying earlier about those different roles in the communicative ecology, you know, the student press is the official, you know, Activate is the official student newspaper. I think maybe to let go a little bit of this idea of being an institutional voice, you know, that the student press maybe needs to see itself as an alternative voice to some extent, and to do that unabashedly. You know, Ilva's there to represent the university and to you know, Julian and others and Sue, you know, to put information out coming from officials, quasi-official institutions, elites, experts, etc. Student press should be there to articulate the voices of students, and I'm not sure that's happening yet. You know, as I said before, I think we need, you know, much more colourful and multifarious communications coming out from the student press, I think, to loosen it up a little bit. I'm not saying be unethical or distribute false, information, fake news, etc. But I am saying that I think, to worry less about, perfect communications, and to allow for a more fecund and perhaps more chaotic public sphere to emerge, in our university, but also in the wider community.
Thank you for that contribution, Rod. Before we close up, I just want to ask the floor if they have any more contributions or final comments, closing comments from anyone. I don't see any hands. So if that's all from everyone, I just want to thank you, a big thank you to our panel discussion, our discussion panelists, and our keynote speaker for the day. And again, a thank you to our SRC Media Councillor, who's been incredible and played a vital role in setting this up. It is really to benefit student media, to benefit journalists, to benefit the entire community in creating content, in being aware, holding people accountable was something that was brought up yesterday as well. So thank you to everyone who's partaken or partook in the last few days. With that, I think we can close this off.